we're taking a little diversion from our Little Mountain Timber handcar. Well, it's part of the handcar set out area. And that's barrels and oil drums. I need more spike barrels for this area. And to quote Arlo Guthrie's Alice's Restaurant Massacre, where he threw his trash down on top of his neighbor's trash, one big pile is better than two little piles. And so I figured I'm going to go ahead and paint up all of the drums, crates, and barrels that I have that I need for this whole area on the railroad. Get her done. Now, as you recall from previous videos, all of the stuff I'm currently working on are 3D prints that I get from Little Mountain Timber Company. I get them off of eBay, but he's also on Etsy. At any rate, they're really first-class 3D prints. This is the barrel that kind of started this whole process. This is the spike barrel that comes with the handcar from also Little Mountain Timber. And it's just a beautiful little barrel, and Charlie's done a first-class job of figuring out these spikes that are sitting in the top. They just look amazing. But the barrel itself is his 5-gallon barrel. It's a smaller barrel, and he's just sort of reworked that so that it doesn't have a top on it and has all of these spikes inside it instead. But he also offers the little 5-gallon barrel just as a 10-pack of little 5-gallon barrels with a cap for either end. And it's a first-class little barrel, and you can model it either open or closed because the caps aren't printed right in there. They're a separate piece, so you can either have it open or closed. I'm going to be modeling all of these as spike barrels, and some of them are going to be open and full of perfect spikes. The company Perfect made metal spikes back in the 50s and 60s. And then a whole bunch of them are going to be closed, and I'm going to print out the proper ends for them so they say that they're spike barrels. Now, first up, I've got to go ahead and put the ends in these. The open ones will have the bottom in, and the closed ones, of course, will have both ends in. And the little printed pieces fit really snugly in there. I don't even need to glue them in place. You just kind of snap them down in place, and they just kind of squeeze right down in there, and no need to even glue them. One advantage to this is if I ever decide I want to open one of them up, I can get in there with an X-Acto blade and just pull it loose. Now, some of them are a little too snug and they just won't go down in there, trying not to press them in so tightly that they get wedged in there crooked. So on these ones that don't want to fit down in there, I'm going to need to do a little tiny bit of sanding to take some of the edge off until they do fit snugly down inside and sort of crunch down into place. The key when you're sanding any kind of disc like this is to make sure that you're not putting a flat spot on there by being careful to keep the piece rotating as you're sanding it. And it fits beautifully up inside here. It has a nice little reveal all the way around the edges, and then I'm going to print out paper tops on cardstock that look like the appropriate end for the spike barrel, and it'll just drop neatly down into the little recessed area here. Now, Little Mountain also offers this huge barrel. It's about the size of a whiskey barrel. He bills these simply as barrels for flat car loads. And then he also makes a wooden rack that you can set these in. But they're a nice big barrel, the size that you would normally see as a whiskey barrel. And he makes oil drums, a 55-gallon drum, which we see here, and then two smaller drums as well. One end has the openings in it, and then the other end is just smooth. It's just closed at one end and has the drains in the other end. And they have wood crates. We've talked about these in the past, and we painted up a bunch for a different show. And I've bought several more of these from him. You can never have too many crates and barrels, I say. And so while I'm painting up all these barrels, I'm also going to finish up these crates. And so, as I said, following the philosophy that one big pile is better than two little piles, I've put all of these together and I'm going to paint them all at the same time. I'm going to follow a technique that I've always used for figure painting, even when I was doing very small figures, and that's to cut out a piece of foam core or a piece of scrap wood and then temporarily glue the figures, or in this case barrels, directly to this strip using double stick tape, which is easy to then pop them right back off and even turn them around and paint the other end, because this fast cap double stick tape works great for a whole bunch of different uses. So I've tacked everything in place here. I've got all of the wood barrels and crates on two strips because they'll be painted again as wood, and then the metal barrels are all on their own strip as they'll be treated completely different as they're metal. Now, I've done an entire show in the past on this VMS no peel surface primer. It comes out of, I believe, Poland, so it's a little bit hard to find, but it's absolutely amazing. Unlike most primers that adhere to the surface using either a solvent or etching, these actually have like an adhesive in there. It almost seems like you're shooting super glue on there or something, but boy, when it's adhered to the surface, it's not going anywhere. Couple of things to keep in mind: it really needs to be well mixed up before you use it, and there's actually a shaker marble inside here, but you gotta shake these things like crazy before the little marble even comes loose. You can yeah, there it is. You can hear the marble rattling around in there at some point. It's all thinned, ready for airbrush. You have to use a slightly higher air pressure. I'm using about 27 psi. And then, as always, light coats. Put everything on in multiples of very light coats. I find, too, that with this stuff, the first coat I work a little further back, and then I can get in closer on the next two coats. As you can see, I'm no longer standing at the paint booth. Unfortunately, my new reality. I'm sitting in my roll-around assisted mobility device. You can use this primer over any surface. I've used it successfully on brass, all kinds of plastic, in this case 3D prints. Because it uses this adhesive material in it, it just sticks to everything, including your hands, and unfortunately including the tip of your airbrush nozzle, so you have to keep moving around and keep the air going at all times. If you set the brush aside even for a short period of time, it's likely to plug up. Because you can purchase this primer in 6 different colors, I'm able to also use it as a base color for my wood graining and so on that's going to be going on over the top of it. So all of the wood items here, the crates and barrels, are being painted in a very dark brown, and then I'm going to dry brush lighter colors over the top of that. And then I'm going to be using a gray, a light gray, medium gray on all of the metal pieces. But it's really handy that this stuff comes in so many different colors. And then when I'm ready to paint the other end, I can very easily pop these loose from the fast cap double stick tape, flip them over, and be careful to line it right back up with where it came from and stick them right back down again. Of course, I'm using the exact same technique for painting the other end. You can see that I left a little bit off on the sides. I didn't try to complete the side look, because now as I'm doing this end, I can finish up the sides. Again, everything's being done in thin layers. And I think I'm pretty happy now with all of my wood items, and I'm ready to switch over to my metal barrels. Those are going to be painted in gray. I've just run some airbrush cleaner through the brush here rather than completely dismantle. So I may have, in fact I have, left a little tiny bit of the brown in there. Again, if you set the brush aside for any amount of time, and there's what happens right there. The bubbles there indicating that the tip is completely plugged up and nothing's coming out. It's all blowing the air back up through the color cup. So time to take the airbrush into the other room and dismantle and completely wash it out. Just using, water cleanup, because it's all water-based paint. I'm not using anything solvent-based here. Okay, following a quick pause for the disaster, I'm now able to get back to my gray primer here. Same exact technique, everything the same here for the gray metal barrels as with the brown wooden barrels. And there we have it, finished primer on everything. Time now to completely clean up the airbrush and the paint booth. And let's get everything over to the workbench and start brushing on colors. First up, I'm going to go ahead and put the little ends on the spike barrels here. Found this really nifty picture online of what the tops and bottoms of these spike barrels actually look like. And so I took this into Photoshop and cleaned it up just a bit. And then I was able to print out sheets in a couple of different sizes because I wasn't quite sure how these were going to fit on the barrel. So I made some a little smaller, some a little larger. And now I'm just going to cut these out with scissors and see exactly what fits on the lids for the barrels. Now, as I haven't put lids on all of the barrels, I've got 6 end pieces here, covers, and I'm using that as a sizing guide, and I'm just setting my little cardstock print on top of one of those and then gently sanding all the way around it until my cardstock printout neatly fits on top of the barrel end. And there we have it, success. They drop neatly down in there, fit nice and snug down in the little reveal, and I'm pretty happy with the look. I wish the printing was a little bit sharper, but keep in mind what you're seeing here is vastly blown up over its actual size. When you're standing here actually looking at it, it looks pretty darn good. And then these are the perfect spikes that I've been collecting for years. By perfect, I don't mean they're perfect. Well, they are perfect, but I mean they were made by a company called Perfect back in the 1950s and 1960s, and I've been collecting them for quite some time. I've probably got a couple of thousand of them. Are you rolling?
I'm rolling.
Oh, good. Yeah, let's see. Let's get daubing in the paint here.
Okay, that is not pumpkin pie mix.
No. Okay, on to dry brushing. I'm using these just cheap apple barrel craft paints. They work great for this sort of thing. But I'm dry brushing. So you can see I'm mixing up a little color on my palette here, paper plate in other words, and then taking as much of that paint off of the brush as I possibly can so that I have a very dry brush. I don't want to come over here with any noticeable paint on the brush, just kind of residue, if you will, so that as I'm brushing this around, I'm just transferring a small amount of paint onto my barrel. Now this paint tends to dry on your palette as you're working, and the drier the paint gets on the palette, the less you have to wipe off on the paper towel. The process changes as you're going, as the paint on the palette dries out a bit. Hence, I guess, dry brushing. Anyway, the key is you want the paint on the brush to be partially dry already and then to have very, very little paint on the brush so that you're actually sort of scrubbing it down onto the model. This is really hard on your brush, so you don't want to use a really good brush. I have several brushes around here that I use just for dry brushing because, well, it destroys the brush, doesn't it? But it's a very valuable technique. It can be used for all kinds of different things, not just barrels. I use dry brushing on structures, figures, locomotives, cars. I mean, it's just something that you can use all the time for all kinds of things. Typically, when you're dry brushing, you're moving in lighter and lighter colors, and then alternating with another technique which goes hand in hand with this, and that's applying washes. That's, say, taking darker colors, quite often just a straight up black, and bringing it down very, very, very dilute, mixing it with a tremendous amount of water or thinner if you're using an oil-based paint or whatever. But at any rate, you dry brush these colors on and then apply a wash, and then dry brush and wash. And I'll quite often go back and forth between the two. Now you can see in some areas here, I've gotten kind of thicker areas. I like to keep it nice, a nice thin layer, but you can see some areas there where the paint is on a little too thick, and there's just nothing you can do about that. If you screw up and you have a little too much paint on your brush and you don't have it properly wiped off on your paper towel over here, then you're going to get thicker areas of paint. And the only thing you can do about that is apply a wash, and that'll help tone that back down. Okay, let's switch over to the oil drums. I'm going to put down a base color of rust. I keep all of my flammable paints in this metal cabinet here. So what I'm using here is Model Master Rust. It's actually an oil-based paint, but I thin with lacquer, and it really kind of becomes like a lacquer, which is very toxic, so you need to be careful with that. But I lightly mist this rust color over my dark gray primer. I want some of that dark gray primer showing through so that I create a very burnt rust, if you will. Something that looks like it's been out in the sunlight, rusting and baking away in the hot sun. So once this dries, this is the effect that I was after. A lot of that dark primer coming through and a lot of the lighter rust layered over the top of it. There's no section here that doesn't have some of that rust on it. Other places have a fairly large amount of that rust. This is kind of the look that I'm after. I'm tempering photographs with my own personal experience and just generalized taste and how I want these to look. But I always like to go to reference photographs to get ideas. Some of these drums I'm going to put paint over the top of this rust so that it looks like there's peeling paint coming off, revealing the rust underneath. It's always great to have the internet so you can go searching for photographs rather than go clunking around in weeds looking for rusty barrels. You can see here too, something that a lot of 55-gallon drums have is they're painted in multiple colors, and quite often the center section is painted white because they're going to put their lettering and logos over that section. At any rate, I want to paint some of my barrels in multiple colors like this. Once again, I'm using these cheap craft paints, and I'm going to be airbrushing them. I have a separate airbrush that I use just for water-based acrylics versus the acrylic lacquers. At any rate, I just thin this with a quality thinner, and it goes right through the brush and works great. So first up, I need to apply my masking tape. I'm using this 3/4 inch Scotch blue painter's tape, and that means I have to cut that down to fit the sections that I'm going to be masking off. So using a hobby knife, I cut this down and then I apply that tape to the areas that I want to leave in rust or paint a different color. As with all paints, of course, you want to shake it up really good, make sure you don't have stuff settled down in there and your paint is nice and uniform. And then I put a small amount of the paint in a little mixing cup here, and I'm using Vallejo airbrush thinner. This is the best thinner I've ever worked with. Typically with these craft paints, I'm mixing about 1-to-1 thinner and paint. Sometimes about 2-to-1 thinner to paint. As always, with the airbrush, apply several lighter coats. Don't get too much on all at once. It dries very rapidly, and then you can move on. Some of these drums, I've just painted the whole center section there white without masking, and now I'm masking out that section. A lot of them I've masked out the ends because I want that rust color showing through the color that I'm putting over the ends. And now I'm applying the color that goes over the ends. Again, layering that on very lightly, not just because it's good technique, but in this case because I want some of that rust color coming through. One technique that I could have used had I wanted this to look like it was peeling dramatically is lightly daub a little rubber cement in this area before applying the color, and then come back and rub away the rubber cement, and you have pure rust coming through in spots, and it looks like the paint has peeled and fallen completely away. It's a fun technique, but I didn't use it in this case. And now the big reveal. Let's get the masking tape off and see just what in the world we've created. And I like it. Not a lot of the rust color still coming through, but a little here and there. Just a nice look, not a completely weathered barrel, but just looking like it's been out in the weather a bit. And now I want to apply some filthy grime to the whole thing, and even some spilled oil which has come out of these. I'm using pure black and very, very heavily thinning it. I want this to be just soupy, soupy wet because I'm going to encourage it to actually run in some places. So I want this to splatter. This is not what you would normally do. I want this to be splattery and drippy and weird. I'm also using gloss black. It'll still dry matte in most areas because it'll pick up the texture of the underlying color, but where it's on thick enough, I want it to look like shiny, glossy, spilled oil. And this is so heavily thinned, it almost feels like I'm just shooting pure paint thinner over the top of this whole thing, but you can see some black sort of starting to appear here and pool in some areas and get down into the cracks. And also the paintbrush is moving so much of this thinner that it's getting kind of splattery in places, exactly the effect that I want. Now, in spite of the fact that I want this to sort of run in some places, I'm still doing this in many coats, many thin coats. And the reason is with any kind of weathering technique, you can always add more in, but you can't take it away. So put on a coat, evaluate what you've got, and then add more if necessary. But don't do too much all at once because you can always add more. You sure can't take more away. This is about 5 different passes on here, and I'm really happy with the look, and I'm going to cut it off right here, at least as far as this technique with the airbrush. I'm now going to move on to another technique. I'm taking, again, very, very, very thinned out water-based craft acrylic, thinned with the Vallejo thinner, and you can see I'm dripping some right on the tops of the barrel. And now I'm going to come back with my airbrush, air only, and just blow this stuff around on the tops of the barrel and let it kind of soak down into the cracks and just look like spilled oil on the top of here. Again, this is gloss black, so in areas where it's building up at all thick, it dries glossy, where in most of these areas it's picking up the texture of the flat paint underneath, and it'll end up drying flat anyway. You can see that in some places it's running down the side of the barrel, exactly the technique I wanted, exactly what I wanted to see here, as long as I don't get too carried away with it. And now, as with all acrylic, water-based acrylics, you have to let it dry to see just exactly what in the world you've got, because the gloss paints will gloss off and the colors shift. And there we have it. I want these to look like barrels that are being actively used, so they're not too terribly beat up, but they're certainly not fresh and clean either. And now I'm going to apply some decals over the top in a few places to add some oil company logos on here. It's difficult putting decals over these flat finishes because of the texture. That will make the decals turn frosty, so if you have any clear areas, that looks really a mess. But if you can trim your decals right up to the paint lines, then they can go on here and look pretty good. Some of what I'm going to be putting on here will just be printed on paper. But that is a subject for a future video. You can also see that I've got a lot of barrels here that still need dry brushing, but I'll get that done before we meet again. Hopefully you're going to want to see all of those videos, and so if you're not a subscriber to the channel, shame on you, but the easy way to subscribe is by clicking on the upcoming blue button. Zoink! Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and Karen and I will see you here next Sunday. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.